Thanks for taking the time to speak. It's much
Yeah,
Man, that's a nice wall behind you. Like, right.
it's kind of perfectly positioned, isn't it? You know
Yeah.
what? I should go like this so you can see the Hofner the whole time.
Oh, the Hofner, yeah. I was going to tell you, actually. I mean, one of the things I was going to tell you to kick it straight up, I guess. So my granddad you can probably tell I'm not from the US originally. So we're
Yep.
based out of Chicago. We've lived here it'll be 9 years this year now.
Wow.
But back in the UK, my granddad was a bass. He was a Royal Marine, and he played sort of brass bass and stand up bass.
Yep.
Um, and then he used to play kind of some sessions back in the UK, or he would play with bands who came through.
Right.
And he played with Tom Jones once when he came through town. But he gave
Awesome.
me his Hofner. It was I don't know, I don't exactly know the model. It's like a very thin, I think. So it's very wide, semi-hollow Hofner bass.
Uh,
And I've got it back in the UK. I'm going to have it shipped over here actually at some point. That's the
nice.
bass. I learned to play bass guitar on that. He taught me bass. So it was yeah, I love Hofner basses. I think they're gorgeous thing.
I do too, man. This particular one, I was on tour in I don't know, the early 2000s. I think it was like 2004 or something like that, and
Yeah.
or maybe even a little bit earlier. And this is a really great sort of it's a music store in Chicago, but a little bit off the beaten path.
Yeah.
It's called Midwest Buy and Sell, and those
Mm,
guys always, you know, the place.
I know that place, yeah.
So I love it's my favorite music store in the world, basically, because those
Yeah.
guys, especially in that time, like eBay was already, you know, like fully there, and
Yeah.
you know, like driving up prices. And those guys were always, first of all, the prices were already completely reasonable.
Yeah.
And then even without you asking, they'd be like, "Oh, just give me," you know what I mean? And like
Yeah,
knock it
they'll
out.
always negotiate. They're really nice guys as well.
Yeah, super nice guys. Wayne, I think, is the main guy, and so like every time I was in the area on tour, I would try to get back there, and that particular bass, which is a '67. You know, I wasn't in the market for a Hofner. It's not something I was looking for, but
Yeah.
I took a look at it, and I, you know, asked to play it, and I played it a little bit, and the other guys in the band were, you know what I mean, like off in the store somewhere, and
Yeah.
I just played a couple notes, and they're like, "You're gonna get that right,"
Yes, straight away.
and I was like, "Yes, I am."
Yeah, they're just such beautiful looking instruments as well.
Yeah,
And I mean that one, the one that I've got is it's in such great condition. It's
right.
still actually got the strings on that my granddad was playing with, and he put it away in like probably the 70s, and
Wow.
it's still got the same strings on it.
That's
So
fantastic.
I was home last time, and it was in the loft at my parents' house. I had a bit of a play on it, and it felt like it was going to shred the ends of my fingers off. So it was probably needs restringing.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, there's another great place here in Chicago called Fretworks, Chicago Fretworks. Those
Okay.
guys do sort of repair. They were both techs at the stores and things, I think, and they do repair of guitars.
Yeah.
And I'll take it to those guys, I think, when it finally does come over and get them to do
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah.
Great story. I love it.
But yeah, thanks. As I say, thanks for coming on. And you sort of, we do sort of a ton of, just by way of a bit of background to the website. So, Kirst, my wife, is a music photographer, and she was working for other publications and things like that. And then we really wanted to do something ourselves with a website where we spoke to people from like right across the spectrum of music. So not just sort of singer-songwriters, but you know, working musicians, people, you know, producers, people in the industry, industry managers. And I guess I've wanted to speak to you for a good long time, and you sort of came on my radar when we were at the House of Blues, and it was for Butch Walker. And it was the first, I didn't even really know Butch. I mean, in terms of him being a musician, I'd heard of him as a producer.
Yeah.
And we went in there, and there were a couple of things. One, I've got a good friend who works at the House of Blues called Neil Turk, and his cousin is Suzanne Santo. And Suzanne was with the band that time round, so she did like a little opening set, and she was with them. And then we saw you, like Butch and you guys, and I was like, holy shit! It was such a great show. It was just like one of those shows where you go in and you kind of like lifted the roof off the place, and I came out feeling out of breath. But I think when I saw you guys, and I was looking about Butch, I was like, that must be his longtime band, because you guys looked like a band. You were all together as one.
Yeah.
And you in particular, like I just sort of picked out, and I thought, yeah, the bass was great. And then I started following you on Instagram. And you started popping up all over the place, like playing with different bands as well. So I really just wanted to talk to you, really, about your musical journey, how you've arrived where you are,
Sure.
And sort of, how you found working in music through your life, I guess. That was the idea. So I was really delighted when you said you would speak with us.
That's amazing. Yeah, and you know what? That to your point about Butch, I've been with him now for about, I guess, about 4 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And he doesn't tour a lot, right? Because he's obviously super busy as a producer, and that's his main thing. But at the same time, it's it does feel like a little family, you know what I mean? And like we have a thread going on, like an iMessage thread that daily we're on it, you know what I mean? And just like posting stuff and all kinds of crazy stuff and politics and the works. And it really, even though obviously now we haven't seen each other in a really long time, and so even though we're not a band in the sense that that bands are some, like, where you're together and you're you know what I mean, and that's the thing you're working on, and it's you against the rest of the world. It's not quite that, because everybody's got a million things going on. Butch first and foremost, but it's a family vibe, and when we go on tour, I mean, it's a riot. It is so much fun.
It looks it.
It really they're all just really great guys, and I wish we toured more than every 2 years or so, but obviously very understandable.
We cover, when the world left shows, we used to go to so many shows. I mean, Curse would be 4 or 5 a week. I'd do another job, so I would get along whenever I could to shows, and we always talk about going into a show. You can tell the second a band steps on stage if they're just dialing it in, and it's like the best thing, I think, being an audience member and when we review shows, is when the guys on the stage look like they're having as good a time as the people in the audience. That's one of those shows where you guys just look like you're having the time of your lives. But we saw you again when you came around to the House of Blues probably a couple of years ago, and it just it doesn't feel that like a musician with some hired guns or anything like that. It feels like a band. That's the best compliment I can pay to that, I suppose.
So I have a question about that. So was that the Christmas show?
Not the Christmas one, the one after. The Christmas one, and then he did one. We missed the Christmas one because we travel back to the UK every year for Christmas.
Got it.
So we couldn't do that one. The first one we saw was the one where you had all the balloons come down at the end.
Right. So
and then the other one we saw, he ended up in the audience at the end playing some sort of acoustic songs. Like he brought a stool out and sat in the middle of the audience. Again, it was just, the energy was fantastic.
The reason I asked about the Christmas show was that I was sick as a dog, and
really?
I had been sick, sort of like whatever, just a cold, a sore throat, whatever, flu-ish, in the run up to it, and then somehow right around sound check that day at the House of Blues, I started feeling really bad, and then thankfully we were the hotel we were staying at was right next door. And I went back to my room, and I'll spare you and everybody else watching the details, but it wasn't pretty. It was coming out of all ends, and we're talking like this is like 4 p.m. or something like that, and it was one of these things where like I started strategizing, because I was like, like the tour manager brought me some Pepto-Bismol and helped for a second. And I started thinking, okay, shows at 9, if I can hurl at 8 and then take the Pepto-Bismol so that it'll stay inside me, then maybe I can make it through the show. So I put off throwing up as long as I possibly could, and it worked. And I did it, and then I took the Pepto-Bismol, and I was like, all right, I think I can do this. And then went up to the dressing room and then played the show. And it's one of these feelings where like you're like 3/4 through the show and you're like, I think I'm not going to shit myself. This is great. We had a bucket, and again, I am getting graphic, and whatever. We had a bucket behind the bass amp just in case.
Did you make it through? No,
I made it through. I didn't need the bucket.
It's funny. I never think about that, like those kind of things, because obviously when you're touring, it's the same as any other job, right? You're going to get sick sometimes, but you don't really get the option to take the time.
Not really,
it's
man.
funny that I had exactly the same conversation with Suzanne. So I interviewed Suzanne about her new album that's coming probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now. And she was talking about the last tour she did with Honey Honey, with Ben. And she said on the very final show exactly the same thing. She got like really sick to the point where she didn't think she was going to be able to do it. And she's like, I walked out in like sweatpants and played the show. And Bennett said to everyone, like, Suzanne's not feeling very well. Yeah. And she was just talking about the fact that like the audience, because he said that at the beginning, were just so behind her that it kind of kept her going through the show. Oh. And then I think she said she threw it right after the show and she was still really sick. But that kind of stuff, you never, when I'm interviewing people, you never think about that. That must happen quite a lot, I would imagine.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not like you can call in sick. You know what I mean? I mean, if you really can't stand up without falling over and fainting or something like that, then I suppose they're gonna have to just figure something out and just make it work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, if any way you can stand upright, then you do the show.
Absolutely. So I think I wanted to go back a bit. So you're Dutch national, obviously. You're born in the Netherlands, and I wanted to sort of talk a bit about how you got into music. And I did actually find a podcast episode with you. I think it was on the Lowdown podcast. So we talked a little bit about Kiss was probably what sort of started it out for you. Were you family musical, or was it just you? Or did your parents like music or play music?
It's funny. Like almost everyone in my family is musical, and we always joke that everyone in my family is in a choir, but all they're all amateur choirs, and my parents are in one, my sister is in one. I think my brother is actually like recently, my brother lives in New Jersey with his family.
Okay, yeah.
Everybody else is back in Holland. My daughter sings and is very musical, and like my aunts are all in choirs. And my grandpa, when he was still alive, was like a point of pride was that he was able to sing off of sheet music, and we were wildly impressed by it.
Yeah.
And so a very musical family with other than sort of like distant second cousins or something like that. No one's a professional musician or had any inclination to kind of go that route. And I also made that decision fairly late in life, after I had already gone to university in Amsterdam for translation of all things, and sort of realized, like, I don't think this is really what I want to actually do. The languages, but that's not really a good enough reason, you know what I mean, to pursue this as a career. And I had started, like I played music since I was a kid, and I started doing more and more of it, and at some point the realization came that if I didn't try it at least for a little bit, I would regret not trying, regardless of the outcome. You know what I mean? And I'm really glad I gave myself that talking to.
Yeah. And did your family encourage you down that path, or were you
very much? So. Yeah.
Which is a great thing, I think. If you get that backing, and you've got to try. I often think a lot of times, when we just made the move over to the US, it was people were saying, well, what if you don't like it? And I'm like, well, if I don't like it, we come back. Like, I'd rather have tried it and then decided I don't like it and come back, rather than think I wish I'd tried it.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I often say I feel like my life is a series of adventures, and now I'm in the Los Angeles one, and before this I was on the New York one. And, you know what I mean? It's sort of like geographically anchored.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally feel the same way. Go on a limb, try something,
Yeah.
and if you don't like it, you can go do something.
So when you made the move from the Netherlands to the US, was that specifically to pursue music?
Yes, I had done some. I had spent some time in the States earlier when I was around 18. I did a year with this group called Up With People, which is like a sort of it's a musical show, but it's sort of community service based, and you stay with host families. So I did it. I had barely turned 18, and I did that for a year. And the bulk of that time was spent in the U.S. And so that was my first, considerable length of time spent in the U.S. But then I went back to Amsterdam, went to college, and then towards the end of that, I had met some people who had gone to Berklee College of Music in Boston, just for a semester, or even like their summer program, possibly. But and the way they talked about it really appealed to me, because I grew up on rock music and pop music. And not on jazz, like, you know what I mean, like schools in Holland, I'm sure, I don't know if it's probably the same in the UK, but like like we didn't have a jazz program, that wasn't a thing. And so I didn't really discover jazz until much later. And so and Berkeley sounded like a place where that was okay. Where that could be your angle, and it was fine. And and I had a love affair with the U.S. since like you said, those early days of the things that I was into, and it does feel like this is the birthplace of so many styles of music that I loved from when I was a kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to mention the biggest pond that you could possibly swim in. You know what I mean? Hey, like let's give it a shot, and if it doesn't work,
it's really an amazing country, and like it saddens me, obviously, some of the stuff going on at the moment, and how the country sometimes probably gets portrayed to people outside of it. And when I'm talking to my friends back in the UK, I'll say that it's a great place. There are great people here. I wouldn't have lived here for 9 years if that wasn't the case, right? And I think it's I think the same. I mean, coming to Chicago and just coming to the US and being as interested in music as I am, it's opened me up to so much music that I don't think I would have ever really got into or listened to as much if I was in the UK. Particularly certain singer-songwriter stuff, right? Like Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And there's a guy called John Morland out of Oklahoma who I love. And I don't think I would have come across those guys had I not been here, or had the chance to go every year to Buddy Guy's residency, at his club. He's one of the originals, and you can stand there right next to him and watch him play still. It's just, some of that stuff is phenomenal, if you like.
Amazing,
And one of the things I was laughing at when I listened to the podcast you did was the fact that one of the first things you went really deep on was level 42. And I was like, man, level 42. And I had them on this morning, actually. I was like, I'm going to listen to this at level 42. And it just took me back to my childhood in the UK. I mean, they were so huge in the UK.
They were massive.
There was a period where they were in the top 10 all the time. I mean, it was and interestingly, because it was like, it had this real pop sensibility, but it was some pretty complex stuff, particularly bass stuff in those.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just like talk about some musos. You know what I mean? Like it's really like a musician band. But they wrote pop songs, and it's not, in retrospect, it's not the coolest stuff in the world, but I didn't care, and it was great. And also, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like they're not sort of like, they're obviously not like cookie cutter pop guys.
Oh, absolutely.
Looking at it, man, it's great, man. They really.
I put those songs on this morning, and I just sort of clicked into Spotify and went on sort of the most played songs, and it was so strange. I mean, what I'm 42 now, it's probably more than 10 years since I've listened to that, heard any of those songs, and I knew all the words to them. I was like singing along in the living room. It's crazy.
One of my favorite records in my, I guess, late teens was their live record, which was just incredible, and I wore that thing out.
Yeah, it was crazy stuff. So I guess so. Then you're in the US. You went to Berkeley. Were you playing in bands at the time? Were you straight into a band when you came over here, or?
And that was fortunate actually. So I came to Boston, and because of that earlier experience I was talking about with this other group, I had, I knew some people in the States, and I knew two people in Boston, two guys, and one of them had been in my traveling cast back when I was 18, and he was the trumpet player. He was living in Boston, and the other guy was in another cast that traveled at the same time, who I had met at the beginning of that year, and he was from the former Yugoslavia. And both those guys had bands, and one was a ska band, and the other one was a funk band. Yeah. And they both wanted me to join like right away, like as soon as I got there. And I picked the funk band, and so I was in that band the whole time that I was living in Boston, and it was great because for as long as I had played music, I had never really been in a gigging working band. Yeah. Ever, you know what I mean? I had done all kinds of stuff, and like, I had bands, with friends growing up and stuff like that, but really like a regularly gigging band with a fan base, like I'd never done it. Yeah. And so that was sort of like a fortuitous parallel education to going to Berkeley. And I was 24 when I got to Berkeley, which is young, but it was actually a little bit older than a lot of the kids who came straight out of high school. And so I felt fortunate in that way that I felt I could sort of pick and choose what I thought was useful to me and that I could really learn something from. And I think I had started forming my musical identity, rather than having gone there 5 years earlier. I think I would have been maybe just a little too green to really get the most out of it. So that was really useful. And so, it was, that being in that band really like provided like a very valuable additional perspective to what it meant to be a musician in a town like Boston. And then, so were you making your living from music right from the off, or? Not there, because Berkeley gave me a nice scholarship, so that and my parents were supporting me, and so I was making some money, but it was mostly costing money, being there. Yeah. But then after about I think in my third year, I had some friends who had some connections and or roots in New York, which it's a 4-hour bus ride away. And so at some point I started doing gigs in New York before I ever moved there. Yeah. And that was really, really useful. And it was at the bitter end. And I had my friend Jen Chapin, who I knew from Boston. Her dad was Harry Chapin. Oh, all right. Yeah. And so and her grandpa was a famous drummer, and she started doing gigs at the bitter end. And so about once a month, I would get on a bus and go down there and play gigs. Before I ever thought about moving there. So I did that for about a year, and so by the time I actually moved there, I knew all the people who worked at the bitter end, and I started gigging in my first couple of weeks there. Okay. And I think I made $600 in my first month there, and I was. That's pretty good. It was great, man. I was like, all right, this is working somehow. Yeah. And then so then did you push on with that? Because I'm always interested to kind of know. It must be a lot about relationships, working in the music industry, the way that you have, and sort of, playing with different artists. Is it just all about just building up those sort of relationships within the music industry and becoming known, I guess, to the right people? Yeah, really, and all the cliches that people utter and when it comes to this are true.
Yeah,
Obviously, you have to have the goods to back it up, and the
yeah,
talent and the skills, and be cool to work with, and
yeah,
prepare, and I felt really fortunate to be in a circle of musicians who all took that really, really seriously, and I remember sometimes being like coming to a different town or spending some time in LA or other places where what we took for granted wasn't taken for granted, meaning if somebody calls you for a gig, right, and they're going to pay you this much and pay a little bit for rehearsals, like when we showed up for rehearsals,
mm,
we would know the stuff, meaning not having memorized it, but like, whatever you got to do, make your charts and,
yeah,
and do your stuff. And so that you can play the stuff down right
yeah,
away, because, you're playing with singer-songwriters who don't have a ton of money. And so,
yeah,
ideally you get it done in an hour or two with one rehearsal, and then,
yeah,
do the gig. Um, and so, yeah, you just take it really seriously, and just to
yeah,
try to, and the thing is, like, I wouldn't do it for them, I would do it for me, right?
yeah,
Because if I'm on a stage and I barely know what I'm doing, and I'm kind of looking around and hoping that I catch all the stuff, that's like,
yeah.
who needs that kind of stress? I don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, be horrendous.
Right, and
Yeah,
and so and so and then of course you develop a reputation, and hopefully people like what you do stylistically,
yeah,
and so, yeah, there was a whole mess of singer-songwriters that I played with
yeah,
in those early New York days, and it was great, and a lot of it was at the bitter end, and at some point, whatever scene I was in sort of moved over to the living room, and
mm,
then at some point that kind of moved over to Rockwood Music Hall,
yeah.
and yeah, so there's these little sort of eras of my time, because I
Yeah.
spent 16 years in New York. It was a long
Oh,
time.
16. You're 16.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and at some point, a buddy of mine, we were in an elevator at one of those rehearsal buildings, and we were on our way to rehearse his music, and he looks at me and he goes, "You must know more songs that nobody's ever heard than anyone in the world." Because because like my friends and I would do like a couple of gigs a night, some
Yeah.
like three different sets a night at the bitter end, like maybe 3 or 4 nights a
Yeah.
week. And
I
so,
think it must be amazing for you, kind of like your musical sensibility though. The fact that you can do that and step in those roles. I thought it was interesting on the when you talked on the podcast about it being really important to you though to have your own sort of identity in
yeah,
terms of playing bass. So, and is that, I guess that must be something that you're trying, but it must be something that now at this stage in your career people want, right? Because anyone who asks you must know you pretty well now, so they
yeah.
want something that you're going to bring to the table, right? A particular sound or a particular.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I would say that it took me longer than some, in
mm,
terms of like realizing that I had a style, or
yeah,
or finding it in the first place, and having the confidence to think that I had a style, that I had
yeah,
a sound, you know what I mean? That I sounded
yeah,
like me, uh and some people have to sort of work a little harder to find it, and I think I was one of those people, and it's okay, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah,
Like I think that I was like, learning stuff is the easiest thing for me. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Taking something in and internalizing it and spitting it back out. That's the easiest thing in the world to
yeah,
me. I can
yeah,
do that all day. And when I played with all those singer songwriters and artists in New York,
yeah,
many per week, that really came in handy. But you also run the risk of not sounding like yourself, kind of
yeah,
like sounding like
just,
everybody and nobody,
yeah,
and but I think I became aware of that, and I worked hard to trust that I was me, and
yeah,
that
yeah,
I was
yeah. I think that must be it. I watched, well, actually, we interviewed a guy called Phil X. He's the guy who took over for Richie Sambora in Bon Jovi.
okay,
And
yeah,
it's funny, he talked to me about, and honestly, it made my heart go fast. He said kind of the second time he had to step in, they asked him, it had all happened very unexpectedly, and the band was on tour, and they were like, he was he was in a Trader Joe's or something, and they were like, we need you to fly out today to come and play with us again. And they sent him like a download. Here's the songs that are going to be in this set. We'll send a private jet to pick you up. And he was like, that gig that night was going to be in front of 40,000 people.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that must be the pressure of that sometimes. But then after that, he was talking about being in that band and sort of, and he made a really interesting comment, and it just made me smile, because he was like, I was like, well, you know, I noticed during one particular song, because we covered one of the shows, you were kind of just going for it out front. And he's like, yeah, you know, for most of the set, I have to do, you know, serve the song, do what Richie did. And then in that one song, like, they let me off the chain for 3 minutes. It's like, and it was kind of, it wasn't bitter, but it was like a little bit, you know, that's my part of the show. That's when they let me loose to do what I do. And that, it must be a challenge sometimes, I think.
You know, and it's interesting, because I sort of feel that sensibility can be shrunk down to a song. You know what I mean? Meaning, especially as bass players, but I kind of feel like it goes for any musician, like, you know, side musician, side person, where that's what you do. And meaning, you think of the song, you think of the artist, you support them. But there's a couple of moments there, you know what I mean? And they're usually in the back quarter or third of the song, where like you can kind of be like, yeah, but what about this? You know what I mean? And then you do a thing. And you know, and it's not like I live for that moment and I just grin and bear the rest of it. I actually love the rest of it the most, you know what I mean? Like to find, you know, to put all that intent and purpose in a note, and like how you're gonna play it and where you're gonna play it. I love that stuff, you know, more than anything else. But it is kind of fun to be like, ooh, but I had this idea. You know what I mean?
And I guess at this stage of your career, you must have, you know, you're at a stage where you can probably choose to work with artists who you really appreciate, or, you know, like as well.
Yeah. No,
do you do, I mean, obviously you play live. Do you do a lot of studio session work as well? Or back in the day, were you doing that kind of work in terms of just going?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I've done a ton over the you know, over the years back in New York and here. I'd say that that here, or even back in New York, it doesn't constitute the bulk of what I do. You know, it's really a mixed bag of stuff: gigs, and then sometimes, you know, tours, or a one-off to, you know, fly somewhere and do a show. Sometimes it's in a studio, sometimes it's, you know, and I've got this place right here, which is awesome, and that I can work in, and so yeah, home recording as well. And you know, in this day and age, it's not just us musicians, but it's everybody else. And I'm not just talking about like the last 3 months with COVID-19, but even before, everyone is kind of like adjusting to this shifting ground, and has been for years, you know, and I don't know almost any musician who hasn't thought about broadening their horizons, or pivoting somehow, or just adding a skill to their skill set. And you know, and to that point, I play plenty of bass, but I started, you know, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've started composing stuff, making my own music for various purposes, commercial or not. And I started mastering tracks for people, and that has become its own little cottage industry for me.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about both of those actually. I think that in terms of the writing, was it something like when you picked up a bass the first time you started playing music? Did you start writing music at that point? Was it something you wanted to do, or no?
No, like really not. You know, I haven't ever considered myself, and still don't consider myself a songwriter. You know what I mean? Like I feel like to be a songwriter, you would have to have something to say as
Yeah.
you know what I mean, as far as like lyrics.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And I don't really have anything floating around in my brain that is trying to come out. But musically, I do, and always have. And uh, you know, I dabbled. I mean, in my late teens, I made some like music for. Actually, no, it was in my 20s when I was living in Amsterdam. I you know, made some music for a play that I was in, you know, like a Holland's play, and like made some like incidental music. And so that was the first time I like tried that stuff.
Yeah.
And then that lay dormant for many years. And then the reason I got into it here was that, well, first of all, LA is fertile ground for it, of course, but also I moved to LA from New York as part of a band called Harper Flynn, and I was, you know, with them for about 6 years, and eventually the band broke up here, as bands do. And it was in that sort of transition period where I had put my sideman career on hold for long enough where I was a little bit like, does anyone still care that I know how to play the bass? Like literally, you know what I mean? I was like, I don't know if anybody gives a shit. and so in that process of trying to regain my footing, I had a friend who had a very successful, you know, sort of one man, started as a one man studio, meaning doing, you know, composing music for mostly commercial purposes and some scoring as well.
Yeah.
And that had grown into a little bit of a bigger business, and he needed help, and so I basically just took a job with him, and just helped him keep the place running. But he threw me into the composing game like week one, you know what I mean? He's like, hey, look, we're doing a demo for Coca-Cola. Want to give it a shot? And I was like, okay, you know.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was nerve-wracking, but you know, but I realized is, you know, just do it, and I'm so happy for that experience because I really enjoy it, and so, you know, that has turned into its own sort of portion of how I spend my days in music.
And it's kind of like you say, I think a lot of musicians now have to have those different avenues, right? It's just because of the world. I mean, and I guess if you didn't have that and you're just a live touring musician, I mean, where would you be at the moment? That's the problem, right? It's interesting to me, you know, I see a lot of that in the music industry now in terms of, you know, there are different firms that will help place music in different places and you can write music for them. Or we did a really interesting interview with a couple of guys in Chicago who have a company called 2625, and they put on events for corporates and things like that, but they also have sort of a management arm for artists based out in Nashville. So they'll source talent to play these events, you know, and I think that's a really lucrative source of income for some bands as well, you know, going down that route. But I think everyone's really, you know, to what you said, everyone's trying to sort of adapt to, I guess, what's available technology-wise as well.
Yeah.
And I think there are pluses and minuses to it. You know, who was it? It was I was reading an interview with Lorde, and she was saying basically that first album that she did, they did it in her house, and it was with like a hacked version of Pro Tools, and it was just all of the native instruments on Pro Tools, and that's what they made the album with.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, I mean, that's more realistic to do. You can do that out of your bedroom and produce something that is, you know, of a standard that can be published, really.
Absolutely, yeah. And for better and for worse, you know. I mean, and I understand people, you know, musicians who lament that things weren't how they were in the 80s or even the early 90s, and I feel like I caught like the tail end of it, and I'm almost thankful that I wasn't an active working musician, like really when the shit was good. You know what I mean? Because I might feel
you would lament it then, I think.
Yeah. And but you know, as you say, like there are so many things we can do with stuff that fits in a backpack. You know what I mean? It's incredible, and I've always been resolved to to utilize those tools, and
Yeah.
you know, and it has led to democratization of music, and you
Yeah.
know, the fact that somebody like her can make a
Yeah.
record like that becomes a worldwide smash. It's, you know, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, no, I think that I like it. I mean, I think there are elements that are good and bad. I think, you know, I followed closely the stuff going on with Spotify and Apple Music and things about that, about the mechanical royalties, and it really, I don't know. I mean, it annoyed me that they challenged the, you know, musicians receiving a little bit more per
Yeah,
stream.
yeah,
That really annoyed me, because I was like, man, it harked back to the days of I mean, it's always been the same, I guess, in one form or the other, but the original record industry days, you know, where those guys were really ripping off the artists that worked for them.
yeah,
And I feel like it's kind of the same there again, where I'm like,
yeah.
you do realize you guys have no business if the creative people aren't producing music. Do you not feel like they deserve a fair share of that? I mean, that's the downside of it, I think. And
yeah.
I also I love listening to older music where you can hear some imperfection as well.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing. Sometimes things have just got a bit too glossy and too much of a sheen on them these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, hearing the odd pick scratch or something like just that slightly off note or something like that added to it. I thought.
Yeah. I've finally convinced myself to stop quantizing things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it took me a really long time to believe it, that there's added value in not doing it. You know what I mean? Because, you know, because I never really believed it. I'm like, yeah, but if things are perfectly in time, that's better, you know?
And when it's there, when it's available to do it, the temptation is right there in front of you.
Yeah. And really, like, it's you know, you're taking part of the palette away if you do that. And so yeah, that's been kind of a fun way to work. Like if whatever I'm doing isn't grooving with whatever else is going on, even if it's on a MIDI keyboard, I'm just gonna play it again.
That makes sense. I think it was one of the I think, I can't remember what documentary it was. It's something that Dave Grohl, the Foo Fighters, did or something. It might have been that one where they went to the different cities and they got John Paul Jones in to play bass on one of the tracks.
Yeah.
And I remember they were doing it all live to tape, I think, but he came in, listened to his track, and there were a couple of bits that were off, and he was just like, "Yeah, we've got it," and left. And they're like, "Oh, okay, that's how we did it back in the day then." And it was, I kind of like that, and that probably so that feeds into like mastering, right? So I want to talk to you about mastering, because I personally, it's like the dark arts to me. I still don't think I fully understand what's involved. So if you were to explain it to like a lay person, how would you explain what you do in terms of the mastering process?
No idea. I just throw plug it on it and, you know, make it super loud, go out the door. No, you know, and I've had to explain it to people, and first of all, never in a million years did I think, even, you know what I mean, a couple of years ago, like, you know what, that's a thing I think I'd be good at, and I think I should do it, like because I felt exactly the same way as you do it.
I absolutely don't mean it as a negative thing, by the way.
No.
I just don't understand it.
I totally get it. I mean, really, honestly, and you know, we were just talking about the tools that we have at hand, right? Like in laptop computers and everything, and I don't. I'll just back up. The reason I got into this is because a friend of mine had some tracks that he had finished and sent them off to a reputable, you know, mastering place and got them mastered, and just didn't like how they sounded coming back, and, you know, got like one revision out of them and still wasn't really happy, and just was kind of just complaining to me because I happened to be on the phone with him about this thing. And it was, you know, I was maybe a year, maybe 2 years into sort of starting to compose my own stuff, and in the process of composing, I just kind of like mix and master as I go along, right? And so by the time I'm done with the piece, I'm also done with everything else, you know. And so I was like, well, I've kind of figured out how to make my stuff sound good, so maybe I can make your stuff sound good. And so I was like, and so I just asked him to send me his tracks, and I was like, let me just give it a shot. You never know, you know. And so I kind of applied what I had learned, and really we're talking about like again plugins that all of us have access to. No, no fancy outboard, nothing. And I did a good job, and he was really happy with it. And I've been mastering his stuff ever since, and he's brought me many other people, and that's how it started. And I don't you know advertise it or anything like that. I just you know and I don't really necessarily want to do more than I do right now, but it's you know it's a couple of projects a week that come in. And so to answer your question, it honestly, like the main thing about it is that it's just another set of ears, other than the obvious. You know what I mean? Like you want to get it loud enough to where it feels good in the context of other tracks, not make it so loud that it starts sounding like shit. You know what I mean? Like you know, keep the dynamics in place as much as you possibly can. So it's really just like getting it loud enough and fix any problems that are there in terms of like, you know, maybe it's a little too bright or a little too dark or something, you know what I mean? And but very early on I decided I was, you know, because I do feel like a lot of people just jack up the high end and the low end just because somebody's paying them and they feel like they should be doing something. And I just had a conversation with my buddy Pete Thorne 2 nights ago. We had some social distancing drinks, and we were talking about this and sort of like imposter syndrome. You know what I mean? Where like, you know, like it took a couple of years for me to feel like, you know what, I'm good at this. And it's actually added value. Like most of the time I was like, this is so easy. I hope nobody ever like asks me how I do it. You know what I mean? Because it's too easy. I'm not doing anything. But the thing is, I am doing a thing. I'm paying attention. You know what I mean? Paying attention. I'm listening to your track. If I hear something that I think could be better in the mix, then you know, then I'll say it. And I've now said it to people who I really respect as artists or mixers or producers, and like, what do you think about this? Or I'll give them 2 options. One where I think like I fixed the thing that I thought could be better, but then I also do one where I just don't do that and just and it's really just like, okay, like, well, the proof is in the pudding. You know what I mean? Like, yes, it's relatively easy. It's not, you know, mixing a track is much harder and time consuming. But it's okay. Like the end result is worth it, and worth it to the people who bring their stuff to me.
But clear, and I think, I mean, in terms of, you know, imposter syndrome, you don't get much more of an endorsement than, you know, you mastered Butch's new album, right? Which, from someone like him, who is, you know, a producer extraordinaire, that must have been quite a nice ask to get.
Yeah, man. And of course, you know, my initial reaction was like, oh, he's just doing that to be nice to me, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that he wasn't, but he also decided to give me a shot, you know. And since then he's brought me other projects, you know, and some are bigger than in terms of just sort of like reach and volume than his own record. And you know, one in particular is going on right now, and I wish I could talk about it more. And
top secret.
but you know, getting for him to hire me to do his record was like a shot in the arm. And but then for him to sort of like give me another few of like projects that I knew he really cared about, that really cemented it for me. And I mean, it's for sure.
I think it was, I'm really interested in that kind of stuff, and I think one of the things that did interest me that I hadn't really been aware of, what was the first person, I heard some interview with Neil Young where he was talking about how digital music ruined the quality of music effectively. And I was like, well, why would that be? And then I read an article called The Loudness Wars, where they were saying when they started producing CDs, it all became about effectively, I think, in the mastering process, making the music louder rather than keeping the peaks and that helped explain it a little bit to me, because they showed sort of a waveform and then said, it would be pulled out this way, so you would lose all that high end and low end, the detail that would have been there maybe on a vinyl record, and in the interests of making it louder for the market when it was on CD or when it was digital music. And I think that was my rudimentary understanding of probably some of what was involved in mastering, just getting the dynamics right and making sure you're not losing that.
Yeah. And that's really it in a nutshell, you know what I mean? And I think for a while, it seemed like there was no end, the loudness wars, right? There was no end to how much people were willing and able to push it. And I feel like in recent, in the last 5 years or so, people have started to come back from that and kind of like, well, there's only so far we can go, you know what I mean, before everything sounds like crap. And people don't seem as concerned with having it be louder than anything else. And there's a whole discussion going on about what the streaming services do, like if your track is too loud, they're just going to turn it down, and so now you're left with a track that has all the dynamics squeezed out of it, and it's still not as loud as everything else. And even within those parameters, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to it necessarily, nor do I master for Spotify or anything like that, you know what I mean? But I do feel it's sort of like injected a little, like, okay, so at some point there's diminishing returns to just pushing everything louder and louder and louder.
Yeah.
And so anymore, I'd make it nice and loud, but when I listen to it, I don't want to hear that it's been compressed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want to hear that it's been squashed on any level.
Yeah.
So,
That's kind of it. It must be so now I guess it must be nice that you've got the three arms of what you do. So like I say, I mean, at least now, given that live music is off the table for, well, I mean, maybe until next year, right? I guess, until we find some vaccine or something like that. But it's you can work from home. You still you've got those other options, which must be
And I couldn't be more thankful for my little studio here. I mean, this is just a room in my apartment, but it's great and it's everything that I need. And I am incredibly thankful that a few years ago I sort of added those two things to what I do, because it's saving my ass, and even when the whole lockdown happened, I didn't even blink. I was like, I know exactly what to do. Not necessarily in terms of like jobs, but more like just kind of going deep on the tools that I use, both especially for composing, because there's so much to learn about the DAW that I use and the plugins that I use and all that stuff. And I know them well enough to kind of get around. I'm like, oh this thing. But I'm like, let me take this opportunity to really like learn and study and like get super fast at all this stuff. And so I'm thankful in a certain way, that this, like, I'm not thankful that this happened at all for any reason, but given that it happened, I'm thankful that I have something to focus on, really.
And then, so I guess was there anything on the, so your last, I mean, man, the list of artists you played with it was unbelievable. I mean, we've mentioned Butch. I think you were just on, and actually, I think Kirsten was going to shoot that show, and for some reason we were away. You were with Natasha Bedingfield. I think you did Park West in Chicago with her. Which is my favorite venue in Chicago, by the way. I love that room. I just think the sound in there and the atmosphere of that room is awesome. But did you have other stuff lined up in terms of going on the road that had to be put back?
Yeah, I had a few things. I play regularly with Richard Marx, and we were supposed to go to Switzerland for a show. That was April. That got canceled. There is / was a tour booked for the fall, and there's no way that that's happening. I mean, it hasn't been officially canceled yet, but I can't imagine that'll happen. With him, it's generally speaking, we do kind of like one-offs or maybe a couple of shows in a row, right? Just fly somewhere and fly back. So, so I didn't have a ton lined up as far as like touring work in the summer, and so thankfully I wasn't like, oh my god, I had this thing and now I don't.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah, and so we'll just have to wait and see.
Anything lined up for next year already, or that you still think might come off?
You know what? I feel like a lot of the stuff that I did have booked, like I was supposed to do a bus tour with Richard in the fall, that I think all of it is just going to get pushed back by exactly a year.
Yeah.
And so I think honestly, like I just had some again social distancing outdoor drinks on the patio with a couple of drummer friends last night.
Yeah.
And some like every once in a while somebody's like, I don't know if this is ever going to come back where like people are like comfortable to like be packed in a room and like be like near each other and all that. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like the day there's a vaccine,
absolutely,
like and 10 times more. You know what I mean? People are just going to explode basically. And
man, I've spoken a couple. That first show back is just going to be, for the audience and the musicians. I think I cannot wait. I mean, it's like. We go to so many live shows for the site and things like that, but it's just, I mean, that's a release for people, right? I've written a couple of blogs for the site, and I truly believe in it. I truly believe in the power of what music can do for people, and for me, like taking that live experience away, it's a killer, because you go into that room and the lights go down and you're somewhere else for 2 hours, and it's a nice place to be, and it's like a pressure valve is how I would put it, and from the normal everyday life stuff. And I will be there with bells on the second we can go back to a live show. I think
same here, and I feel like my I love touring and being with my buds, and you know what I mean, it's and playing those shows. It's so much fun. I also love being at home and working. What I mean, like I'm doing right now. And when things are normal, those things really like feed each other in a beautiful way, right? When I'm on tour, and like by the time it's over, I'm really ready to come back, hunker down and do my stuff here. And then when I'm here for a while, I'm like, I'm kind of ready to get out there. Oh, here's the show. You know what I mean? Let's get on a plane. And I don't have that now. And but I am almost worryingly, disturbingly comfortable in this situation, almost to the point where people are like, "Man, but you can't wait to like go back out, like to go do gigs." I'm like, yeah, I guess so, right? And I know I will be. I'll be ecstatic, and I can't wait for it. But I also can wait for it somehow. You know what I mean? Like I'm okay. I'm okay hunkering down for like an extended period.
Well, it's got to be. I mean, surely, I guess when we come out of this next year, Butch has got to be ready to take that album on the road, right? It's got to be one of those.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about him and that album is that he waited fairly long to put it out, because it was recorded in 2018, and I know that because I was in Japan for 3 months on a tour with a Japanese artist, and I missed playing on it. Not that Butch needs me, because he's a fantastic bass player, and probably do a better job than me. But he got me to master it, which is great. So anyway, all that to say, he waited pretty long to put it out, because it's it's pretty political, and
it is.
And he was worried. He was worried that there would be a backlash against it. We weren't in his band. No. We're like your fans are going to eat this up. And
it's it's time. I hate this view that artists should stare at why everyone's entitled to their opinion on what's going on in the world. Just because it's an artist, why should they like stay in their lane, or however they put it? And I was listening to oh man, I'll tell you what I love that was released as well in a similar vein to Butch's album, BJ Barnum, the new American Aquarium album, Man, that is fantastic.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you haven't listened, give it a listen. That's a commentary on what's going on at the moment as well. And just the opening track, I listened to the opening track. It's about 8 minutes long, and I was like, you summed it up perfectly, man.
Wow.
It was great. But I did think the same with Butch's, and I also love the fact with that album that it's it's meant to be played beginning to end.
Yeah.
I like that, and I think I talk about, since we've been over here, that I've got back into like vinyl and listening to things on albums, and that's honestly, outside of the sound of it and everything like that, the reason I like it is because it makes music a little bit of an event again in the house. Because if you put an album on, you're kind of committing to listening to it from beginning to end as the band put it together.
Yeah.
And I like that. So that was one of the things I loved about Butch's was, I think he actually said, I've written this so that it should be listened to as a narrative, as a story that goes all the way through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's extremely understandable that he's sort of battling with how to translate this to a live context, because like certain songs, you know what I mean, it's they're written, if I'm sure some of your viewers, a lot of your viewers probably don't know, but they're written from the point of view of someone who isn't Butch, right, who has maybe, you know what I mean, like racial bias, like O'Rourke, you know what I mean, like some bad stuff is said,
exactly,
mildly, you know what I mean, and if you pluck one of those songs, like, let's play that one, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
First song in the set, people were like, wait, what did you say?
What's he talking about?
Yeah. So, it's challenging, and really, like, maybe that's maybe that album can only be played in its entirety live, and we've talked about doing it, and I really hope that we do.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting way to do it. It's probably such a challenge for a lot of. I've seen sort of interviews with Jason Isbell, actually, when we were talking about him earlier, where he gets really frustrated when people are asking him, like, he's like, I'm the narrator in some of these songs. It doesn't always mean that it's written, it's like from my perspective or from my experience, I'm writing songs, right? These are stories as well. So, I think it's a tough one to probably get over for some people.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, thanks so much I've just noticed we've been talking for about an hour, so thanks so much for taking the time. That was I really enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, man. I found that I don't mind talking about myself, apparently.
It's a good topic.
It's not like I've done so many interviews, but they go on about this long.
But it's been really interesting, and honestly, it's kind of like fascinating to me talking to people from like doing all kinds of different things in the music industry. And what's really nice as well is, the fact that you're able to make your living in the music industry, because I think it's so rare these days. I mean, it struck me. I got the chance to talk to a guy from the band Biffy Clyro, Ben Johnston, the drummer from Biffy Clyro, the other day, and they're huge. I mean, in Europe and the UK now, and I was talking to him about the first time I saw them was back on, like, the Enemy used to do an emerging bands tour in the UK.
Yeah.
And I saw them there, and then I worked with a guy called Paul Gamble Beresford, who was a drummer in another band that was on that tour, right? So these were like, the Enemy would put these tours on around colleges and universities in the UK, best up and coming bands in the UK. I used to go every year.
Yeah.
And Paul was in this band called Your Codename Is Milo, and I thought they were a great band. But I was saying to Ben, I was like, man, I must have seen like hundreds of bands on those Enemy tours, and out of all those hundreds of bands, you're the only guys who've sort of exploded to be able to make a good living from doing that. And it's such I think the music industry is that kind of like million to one shot, right? Of whether you're gonna, unless you diversify and you've done lots of different things to make sure that you can make your living there, and I like that. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and it's something that can be applied outside music as well, of course. You know what I mean? Like, especially in this day and age, like there's no reason why you can't do a bunch of different things and do them well. And in fact, I was once talking to a friend of mine who composes a bunch of stuff. film world, generally speaking, and I was saying that I had just started to kind of like dabble in it, and I said to him, you know, like I love this and I would love to do more of it, but I can't give up gigs and
Yeah.
tours. Like when the call comes and it's something that I want to do, I got to do it. Like that's,
Yeah.
you know, and he, you know, and he kind of took that tack. He was like, you know, that's not, you know, if you keep doing that, you're never gonna make a name for yourself in either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, that may be true, but I think it's just how I got to do it because
Yeah.
I need both of those things.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm a household name in either, and nor do I give a shit. You know what I mean? I you know, like you said, I'm making a living. I'm working with really interesting people who I super respect, and there's enough work to fill my days.
Yeah.
And why not do both? Because you know, as I said before, like once I've done a bunch of one, I kind of want to go do the other, and a bunch of that I want to do this one again, and it's great. And why not? You know.
And it seems you seem really fulfilled as well in that respect. I mean, it must be nice, you know, to do something that as your work that you truly love. I think that's a great position to be in.
Yeah, feel fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you get back to your Saturday. I'm sure you've got some mastering to do on the top secret project.
Yeah. I'm actually going to go for a swim, which is the first time in 3 months that I swim laps in public pools in my neighborhood, and it's one of these things like they're being very careful and like you got to reserve a lane, and I'm just like looking outside, the sun is shining. I'm like, today's the day.
Yeah, they've just opened. I think here in Chicago this weekend. We went into phase 4, I want to say, of the reopening. So I think they've opened some gyms and pools, and you can go inside bars now as long as you're distanced. So maybe we'll go for a beer later today in a bar. That would be nice. That'd be nice. I haven't done that yet.
Tell your UK people to hurry up and fix this thing, because my daughter is in Switzerland and she wants to go visit her boyfriend in London. So
and they'll not let her travel in.
Well, they're actually going to do it soon, I think, and she's going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks, but she's willing to do it.
I'm a bit worried that I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I mean, every year when we're over here, the absolute try and get over and see my parents as much as I can, and my sister and family and stuff. And I travel a lot for work, so often I'll be in Europe for work, and then I'll just hop over to the UK. Obviously this year, no business travel, but at the absolute bare minimum every year, we go back at Christmas for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm a bit worried that it's not, I mean, maybe we'll be able to travel, but they've got this 2-week quarantine, which then what's the point if it's still there? And plus, even if they don't, you know, my folks are in their 70s now, Kirst's parents are, you know, in their 70s. I'd never forgive myself if we picked something up on the plane and took it back. So I'd be really nervous about it. So I don't know, maybe things will change between now and then. Maybe they'll, like, fingers crossed, they'll come up with some vaccine. But maybe this will be the first year that we don't go home for Christmas. I'm hoping that's not the case.
Yeah, another feeling.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks so much for taking the time, and we'll pop this up on the website in the next couple of days. And we'll drop you a note to let you know when it goes up.
I'll tell all my family about it. But thank you for taking the time and for reaching out, Phil. It was great.
No problem. I really enjoyed it.
All right, me too.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Bye.